Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started today. Thank you so much for joining us today. For today's week of webinars. I'm Paul Goslin. I'm Deputy Director of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office at the Department of Water Resources. This week of public webinars is targeted to provide specific information for all interested parties and different audiences each day. We hope you have joined us for other webinars this week if they are of interest to you. We have one more tomorrow on groundwater data and tools, and we invite you to join that one also. Today's public webinar is focused on resources for SGMA implementation. I want to take a moment upfront to recognize that the work you are all doing to develop groundwater sustainability plans and implement SGMA is paving the way for a new era of groundwater management where locals and communities are charting what sustainable groundwater management looks like as we move forward into the future. This work in front of us, the collective groundwater community, is critically important since groundwater has served as a resource during prior droughts and during this current drought, where nearly 85% of Californians rely on groundwater for some portion of their water supply, and over 1.5 million Californians rely on domestic wells for drinking water. Implementing SGMA has a long timeline of 20 years. However, it's important that agencies start as soon as their plans are adopted to advance projects and actions to achieve basin sustainability goals. Communicating and engaging with your communities to implement SGMA is a key driver for success. Today's webinar will go over assistance and resources available to support SGMA implementation. So again, thank you for your dedication to this important work. We have set up the Teams platform today where you can either join from a computer device or call in. There's an option in Teams to have closed captioning, and we have the chat function open so you can provide questions and comments throughout the presentation. Our staff have incorporated time for us to have a good dialogue today. With that, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the staff that will be hosting the public webinar today. From DWR's SGMA staff, we have Keith Wallace, Ellen Crandell, Tim Godwin, and Melissa Sparks-Krantz. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Keith to start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. So hopefully you all can still see the screen okay as I advance the slides here. Want to talk about how to participate in today's webinar. The first way you can participate is by listening through your computer's audio, using your speakers, or your headset. So when you join, via the Teams link on your computer or mobile app. The second is by calling in on your computer or your phone. And so to call in, you can dial the phone number, from your device and provide the conference ID that is shown here on the screen. Just as a reminder, though, that all participants' microphones will be muted and your video will be disabled. This is just to help minimize some distractions. But please note that today's webinar is being recorded, and that the copy of the recording will be made publicly available, on our website after the meeting. So there are a couple ways to submit comments during today's workshop. The first is by sending your comment or question in writing, through the chat feature. You can do this by opening the Microsoft Teams chat in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. So that's what is shown here on the photo. And there's a chat panel that will allow you to type in your question. Or if you'd prefer not to use the chat feature, you can use our sgmps@water.ca.gov email account, and you can submit your questions or comments there. We're going to read people's questions out loud when it comes time for the question component. And since we have a lot of participants on the line today, if someone makes a comment that you agree with, you can note that in the chat box, but you can do so without having to repeat the entire comment itself. You can just say, I agree with so-and-so. And then if you have any input, on the use of our Teams platform today, please let us know. again, through that sgmps.water.ca.gov email account, because this is one of the things that we've been testing out, like how to conduct these webinars through Teams this week, and want to see how you all like this way of going about it. So here's the general agenda for today's presentation. First, we're going to go over the assistance that we've provided to date, but then we're going to take a deeper dive into our planning and financial assistance resources. As Paul mentioned, today's webinar is really about Sigma implementation resources that the department has to provide. And today we're going to focus a lot on outreach and engagement. And that's because it's such a vital component, of Sigma implementation itself. And we recognize that a lot was done in the area of engagement, during GSP development. But now as, the state is really moving in, as a whole, moving into the GSP implementation phase, there's more engagement, to be done. And so we wanted to take this time, during this week to remind you all of the resources that, we as the Department of Water Resources has available to support your outreach and engagement activities. So this includes, downloadable resources and tools, references, but it also includes financial assistance, that has been made available and will be made available in the future to support, your own outreach and engagement activities. And then just as another component, for today's webinar, to help make this more interactive, and so it's not so much just us, speaking at you throughout the whole time. Throughout the webinar, we're going to solicit some feedback from you all via the chat feature, to help us, better understand, how you've utilized our current resources, and maybe, what things you might like to see different in the future, and that's just to help continue to support your future outreach and engagement activities. And then we're going to close out today's webinar with plenty of time to answer any questions you may have about our assistance, or just things that you've noticed or you'd like to see differently, or just clarifying questions in general. And so, but before we really jump into the content itself, we have our first poll question, and we wanted to we're posing this question to help us better understand like how you have participated in GSP development, or implementation so far. So specifically, the question is what role have you provided in the development and or implementation of a GSP in your basin or subbasin? And so again, we're going to ask you to use the chat feature to put in one or more of the following letters. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to tally these responses right now to show like what the survey results will be. We're going to do that manually later, and then we'll post those results when we post the presentation itself. So again, now getting back to the question, if you can provide in the comment box responses to what role have you provided in the development and or implementation of a GSP in your basin or subbasin, and please enter the letter A if your community service, if you provided community services at a non-governmental organization or NGO, or a community-based organization. B, services as a consultant, services on behalf of representing a tribe. D, served on a GSA board of directors. E, served on a technical planning advisory and or ad hoc committee. F, attended a GSA meeting as an interested party. G, provided comments about, or on a GSP or to the GSA. Or H, you can enter, another category if we haven't provided a response here that fits into your category. So again, you can enter one or more of the letters that correspond to how you've engaged in GSP development or implementation. We'll give you a minute or so to provide your responses. Looks like we're still getting a few responses, so take a little bit more time. All right, I think that's died down. So why don't we go to the next slide and provide a quick summary of the assistance that we've provided to date. So just a reminder that, in addition to our regulatory role, which is, reviewing the GSPs and assessing them, Sigma also assigned DWR with an assistance role. And so we've taken this role very seriously. And since 2015, which was the inception of our sustainable groundwater management program, we've provided more than $250 million in assistance to support locals with their Sigma implementation. And we break our assistance into 3 different categories. The first being planning assistance, and we provided about $28 million to date in that level of assistance through our base and point of contacts, facilitation, and written translation services. We've provided about $54 million in our technical assistance. So this includes our technical support services program and our data and tools efforts. And then the vast majority of our assistance in terms of a dollar amount, which is about $175 million, has been provided through our Sustainable Groundwater grant program, both the planning grant program and the implementation grant program. And so we're going to talk today about our planning and financial assistance. Like tomorrow's webinar is going to cover the technical assistance. And so if you haven't done so already and you're interested in listening into that discussion, please register for that webinar. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Erin Crandall, so that she's going to talk about our outreach and engagement resources.
Thanks, Keith, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'll be going over our outreach and engagement resources that Keith touched on earlier. Next slide, please. So as an overview, I'll be going over 5 main topics of our outreach and engagement resources today. And as Keith mentioned, tomorrow's webinar will be going more thoroughly into our DWR technical services, so I won't go into that much today. And we'll go over all these items in more details in the following slides. So the first resource we have is our region office engagement with our regional coordinators and points of contact. The second topic is communication and engagement, which you can see from this figure that on our website. This tab has some accordion drop-down menus that have a lot more information and resources. And those include program events, toolkit items, and then what's off the screen that you can't see is also translated materials. Next slide, please. So some additional services that we offer are facilitation support. We have written translation service, and we also have a listserv that you can subscribe to in order to stay informed of program updates. Next slide, please. So DWR has assigned a dedicated staff member from our 4 region offices to each high and medium priority basin to attend meetings, either virtually or in person, to answer questions and act as a liaison between locals and our program. We also have dedicated regional coordinators and geology leads from each office. Staff in all of these important roles can help with Sigma-related questions and work closely with Sustainable Groundwater Management Program staff in order to provide assistance all across the state. And as Keith mentioned, DWR Region Office engagement with Sigma basins has been crucial during GSP development and will remain so during implementation of the groundwater sustainability plans. Region Office POC maps and regional coordinator contact information can be found on our website, shown in the red boxes on this screenshot. Next slide, please. Okay, so that brings us to poll question number 2. I'll read through the question and answers, and then we'll give a couple minutes for you to answer, and you're all pros at this by now. So the question is, what about DWR points of contact, or POCs, are most helpful to you? Please answer in the chat with one or more of the following letters as it applies to you. So A, I think the POC maps on DWR's website are helpful. B, I like being able to email or call my POC with questions or concerns. C, I like that my POC has been coming to GSA or advisory or ad hoc meetings. Or D, I didn't know that my basin or subbasin had a DWR POC. We'll give just a couple minutes for answers. Saw some D answers come through, so I'm glad we'll be talking about this today. If you didn't know, we had DWR POCs. Okay, looks like our answers have slowed down. Maybe we'll move on to the next slide. So our next topic, which you can also find on the website, is that the Sustainable Groundwater Management Program, this program, has hosted many webinars and events in the past, which get posted to both our assistant and engagement site, as well as other SGMA-related DWR websites that are relevant to the topic or the webinar, relevant to the topic of the webinar or that event. So I want to highlight just the intent of webinars versus other DWR events that we've hosted, like forums or listening sessions. Webinars are really for the department to share information to support locals moving forward with their SGMA implementation. And then a GSA forum is an opportunity for GSAs to network, share lessons learned, and then talk about how they are implementing SGMA in their basins. So it's really a sharing session. You can find these and more from our statewide groundwater management page linked at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. All right, so we have 2 poll questions in a row. Poll question number 3. What webinars would you like to see the department conduct in the future? So as it applies to you, however many of these letters, go ahead and answer in the chat. A, General Sustainable Groundwater Management Act or SGMA overviews. B, assistance on how to navigate department data, tools, or assistance processes or websites. C, outreach and engagement tips and tactics. D, all of the above. E, other, something we haven't thought of. Or F, you would like to email our sgmps@water.ca.gov email in order to submit a webinar topic you'd like to see. Give a couple minutes for answers. We really appreciate your participation in answering these questions. This is great info and feedback for us, so thanks. Okay, it looks like we've slowed down on this one, so let's go to poll question number 4. Question number 4 is that the department would like to hold another GSA forum. And what topics would you like to discuss in a future forum? So again, as many as these apply to you, please answer in the chat. A, procedures such as reporting provisions, withdrawal or amendment of a plan. B, plan content such as basin settings, sustainable management criteria, monitoring networks, project and management actions. C, GSA funding mechanisms. D, interagency agreements such as interbasin and coordination agreements. E, land use planning. F, all of the above. G, other, something we didn't think about. Or H, you plan to email our SGMPS email account to submit a GSA forum topic. We'll go ahead and give a couple minutes. We wanted to do a couple questions about events because we're really interested in what you'd like to see, in terms of future events and how we can continue to provide these kinds of venues and webinars and information. So this is great. Okay, I think we're starting to slow down. Maybe we'll give another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll go on. Okay, next slide, please. So DWR developed a couple of guidance documents. As Keith mentioned earlier, we have a lot of materials, so I'll go over a few of those here. In addition to other guidance documents related to Sigma implementation, plan development and now plan implementation, we have two specific guidance on communication and engagement. As well as many more toolkit items. So these guidance documents, which were developed to assist GSAs in developing their GSP, include stakeholder communication and engagement, and also an engagement with tribal governments document. And we realize hosting meetings has become a lot more complicated due to COVID restrictions over the last year and a half. And so in May 2020, we emailed some tips and tactics for online meetings via our listserv, and it's also now housed on our assistance and engagement page. This document provides a recommended step-by-step approach for conducting a webinar or a video conference, such as this one. We understand, DWR understands that there are areas of the state that have some connectivity issues, and that GSAs have been attempting other creative ways of hosting meetings in a socially distanced manner, such as tailgate meetings or meetings at drive-ins, for example. And our POCs are sharing these creative ideas among one another to share with their respective GSAs. And so the next thing we put out in spring 2021, we put out guidance on engaging and communicating with underrepresented groundwater users. And this aimed to help all groundwater users become engaged in Sigma and stay engaged, including underrepresented individuals and groups. This document was targeted for GSAs to reconsider how they engage communities, particularly those who have traditionally been underrepresented. Among a number of things, this document encourages going into these communities and not relying on the communities coming to them. So this includes meeting those communities and the public where they meet and when they meet. So underrepresented communities may not always be able to participate in their current means of engagement. So GSAs should not wait for communities to come to them, but should instead make the effort to go out to those communities. We also released a video on the importance of groundwater in California, some groundwater basics, and the importance of SGMA. The video is available in English, Spanish, Punjabi, and Hmong. This video and also a SGMA groundwater interactive story map are great starter pieces to help expand public awareness of SGMA and groundwater basics. So it's a great tool for GSAs to be able to put on their websites or get out to folks in their basins. And lastly, we released a media relations and social media guide for GSAs and others to effectively use their media relations and social media to share information about what's going on in their basins. Next slide, please. So that takes us to poll question number 5. So poll question 5 is, have you used any of the toolkit resources provided by the department? And again, please answer as many letters as are applicable to you in the chat. So A, yes, I have found these resources helpful. B, yes, but I would like to see more or different resources. C, no, I don't find these resources helpful. D, no, I didn't know that these resources were there. Or E, I plan to submit an SGMPS email in order to submit toolkit resource ideas that would be helpful to me in the future. Give a couple minutes. I see someone listed a resource for us, so thank you. That's great. The more information we have, the better. All right, so we do have another poll question on the next slide, so maybe we'll go to that one. Again, we are very interested in what engagement documents might be helpful to engaging folks in groundwater basins. So poll question number 6, what entities are you looking to further engage? A, elected officials. B, underrepresented communities. C, tribes. D, domestic well owners. E, counties or land use authorities. Or F, other. Give a couple minutes for these. Okay. Getting some good answers here, so let this one go a little bit longer. Okay, I think maybe go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so we have a couple more engagement topics to talk about. One being our facilitation support services. So we have a contract that provides us access to trained facilitators that can be assigned to a basin upon request. And this makes professional facilitators available to locals implementing SGMA in order to support outreach and engagement efforts to interested parties. These facilitators can help with stakeholder outreach as well as general meeting facilitation. And listed on this slide are the services offered through our facilitation support services contract. So you can see there's quite a bit that we can help you with, including public and stakeholder outreach, tribal government outreach, governance development support, and more. So eligible applicants for this service and the application can be found on the facilitation support tab online, and we are continuously accepting applications. Next slide, please. So for our written translation services, we have a team that can translate written documents into 8 different languages upon request. You can see those languages on the screen here. And for now, we're limited to 5,000 words per basin or subbasin, which is around 30 full pages of text. So it's quite a bit of information we can translate. And for more information and for the application on written translation services, that can be found on the written translation tab online. And again, we are continuously accepting applications for this service as well. Next slide. Okay, so poll question number 7 is, have you or your basin or subbasin used either the facilitation support or written translation services provided by the department? Answer A is yes, they have been helpful in my basin or subbasin. B, no, these services were not needed in my basin or subbasin. C, no, but they would be helpful in my basin or subbasin. D, no, I didn't know the department offered these services. E, I don't know whether my basin or subbasin has used these services. Or F, you would plan to email our SGMPS account to submit additional languages and or facilitation services that would be helpful in my subbasin and basin in the future. Give some time. Seeing some D answers. So if you didn't know before, I'm glad we talked about it today and you were here to join us. Saw some F answers. So yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from you if you have some suggestions for us. Okay, looks like we've slowed down. So maybe we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so the last item I wanted to touch on today is our listserv subscription, which is a great way to stay apprised of updates and new information for our program. So if you're interested, I would say to sign up to receive program updates, and these include monthly newsletters, funding information passed on from DWR's Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant Program and other sister agencies as they're applicable. And we have information on upcoming groundwater and SGMA related events and webinars, new data sets and tools, and a lot more. So it's a great way to stay apprised of what's going on in the program and how you can stay involved. And with that, I will hand the presentation back over to Keith to talk about DWR's financial assistance resources.
Thank you, Aaron. Sorry, it's taking me a while, everybody. I'm having to click a bunch of different knobs and buttons. to be able to advance slides and get myself off mute and on back on camera. So as Aaron just said, we're going to transition talking about our financial assistance resources. And so right now, what you see on your screen, is a screenshot of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant Program webpage. It contains information on the active solicitations and a summary of the past solicitations that we've had. And so this program is administered by our department's financial assistance branch. And so that's separate from, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office, which, Aaron, Paul, and I are a part of. And so, but we are working, we in SGMO, as we call ourselves, are working very closely with the financial assistance branch to help to support the management of this grant program. So wanted to share, what's going on in this area today. And as you'll note, at the bottom here includes a link for, I'm sorry, the website itself includes a link to subscribe to their grant program listserv. And I encourage you to sign up for that if you haven't done so already, just to be aware of the most recent grant information. We'll have a slide later on that's going to go into that in a bit more detail. So just in general, I want to talk about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant Program and how it consists of 2 existing grant programs and then one that's developing. So it's new. It's a result of this current year's budget. But the first existing program is our Sustainable Groundwater Management Planning Grant Program, and this is intended to fund activities that support the development of a groundwater sustainability plan. Whereas the second existing grant program is the Implementation Grant Program, which funds projects and programs that support the implementation of a groundwater sustainability plan. And so this new program that we're developing, and we'll talk about in a little bit more detail here, was created or is being created or developed as a result of some general funds that were appropriated to us in the fiscal year 21-22 budget cycle. And because it's general funds, it gives us the opportunity to fund both planning and implementation style projects at the same time. So we'll cover this again on the subsequent slides. So first I want to talk a little bit more about sort of the history of the planning grant program and how, so far over 3 different solicitation rounds, we've awarded about $150 million. And all of these funds were provided by either Proposition 1 or Proposition 68. And again, these activities supported the development of a groundwater sustainability plan, but the type of activities could really vary from application to application, whether it's, studies that help inform basin conditions or, ways of filling data gaps that may exist, developing monitoring programs, preparing or developing models, for simulations within the basin, just writing chapters, of the GSP itself, or just general outreach and engagement activities. And then of these funds, more than $16 million was provided for projects that serve severely disadvantaged communities, and most of that funding was really used for specific outreach and engagement activities within those severely disadvantaged communities. And you can see the screenshot that we have here on the slide is where you can get access to this information on the Sustainable Groundwater Management webpage. And so this is under the past grants category here on the drop-down menu. So next I want to talk about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Implementation Grant Program. And this was initiated by Proposition 68, which made about $100 million available for award. We had 1 round of this funding so far, and that was at the direction of last year's budget, the 2020-2021 budget, which required the department to accelerate the award of $26 million to critically overdrafted basins And so that's what we did. We developed a grant program to, it was a streamlined program to get the funding out as quickly as we could. And we released the documents, the guidelines and the proposal solicitation package in the late summer of 2020, and then finalized in the fall of 2020. And so in January of this year, we received 15 applications that were requesting over $70 million in grant funding. And again, we had 26 million available, so we awarded 6 grants, and we awarded this to projects that were all part of their respective basins' project and management actions, and each of these are intended, I should say, to develop new water supplies for the basin itself. And then of the 26 million awarded, more than $5 million was awarded to projects that benefit underrepresented communities. But in reality, each of these projects really had provided some level of benefit to the underrepresented communities, but there were a handful in particular that were solely benefiting underrepresented communities. So with that, before we start talking about the upcoming solicitation, want to get a sense of who on this webinar today has participated in our past grant solicitations. So for this poll question, we're looking to see, has your basin or subbasin been a recipient of Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant Program funding? A, yes, my basin subbasin has received funding for planning. Or B, yes, my basin subbasin has received funding for implementation. C, no, my basin subbasin has not received funding in the past. D, no, but my basin subbasin is interested in future funding. Or E, I don't know whether my basin subbasin has received funding. Looks like we're still getting some responses here. All right, it looks like kind of slowing down there, so I'm going to go ahead and, oh, got a couple more. Or maybe I'll wait another 10 seconds or so. All right, so want to talk a little bit about this new solicitation that was created by this year's Budget Act, and it was actually, which that Budget Act was signed just last month, so September of 2021. And what this did was it made $180 million in general funds for SGMA implementation, and it just called that in general terms, but really these funds can be, as I mentioned earlier, can be for a broad range of activities, and so it's not specific to planning or implementation style projects, which is why we're choosing to call this solicitation SGM implementation, planning and projects, just to demonstrate that that this can be multiple different project types. Of the $180 million that was made available for this current fiscal year, $60 million was set aside for projects that benefit groundwater basins in the San Joaquin Valley, but also have some flood management element to it. So specifically, these projects can be for geophysical investigations to identify a recharge potential. That can be early implementation of existing regional flood management plans, which incorporate groundwater recharge, or they're projects that provide, for floodplain expansion to benefit groundwater recharge or habitat. So that's a requirement. Actually, this funding has a time constraint associated with it. Of the $60 million, $40 million of it has to be committed, so awarded to a specific basin or more by September of 2022. What also happened in this year's Budget Act is that there was an additional $60 million that is going to be appropriated in fiscal years 22-23 and 23-24. So it's again for the same type of Cigna implementation funding. So it's got a, it is broad again. It doesn't have, excuse me, that same San Joaquin Valley commitment at this time. But the way I understand the budget process is that this funding, this level of funding, 60 million, per year, the next 2 fiscal years, is essentially committed, but things could change as they get into the Budget Act, each of the different years. So even though this appropriation was approved just last month, we already have released draft guidelines for and the proposal solicitation package, for this next round. And specifically, we released the documents on October 13th, so just last week, and so now these draft documents are available for public comment. The public comment period doesn't close until November 29th, but we also are having a public webinar on November 16th from 2 to 4 to be able to go into the details of this program and a little bit more, but then also to be able to solicit comments during that time frame. Again, these documents are draft, and so and we really encourage you to review these documents. They're available online, and we encourage you to attend the workshop to listen in on the more information. So even though there is going to be the workshop, I did want to take a little bit more time today to talk about some of the specifics of what we're intending. So as I mentioned a number of times already, that this is going to be available to fund both the planning, and implementation style projects, and including really, but not limited to. And I just wanted to provide some general or very broad categories, but it's GSP update activities, and so this can be any number of things really. Their outreach and engagement efforts can be funded. You can look at efforts to fill data gaps that you may have with your existing GSP. You can perform future studies to help with those data gaps, or just to assess new components of your plan. It can also include project development planning. So a lot of times in the past, there would be limitations from bond funds that you could only seek funding for design or planning activities associated with a project if there was a construction component attached to it. These general funds don't have that same constraint. So if you have a project idea but you need to flesh it out a little bit more, you can seek funding for that. And then lastly, you can seek funding for actual construction projects. And so again, take a look at the draft guidelines in PSP for more details, including there's a much broader list of eligible activities, but I would also like you to take a look at some of the ineligible activities and that are associated with this program, and much of that is just general state requirements or state rules that we must adhere to. But I'd like you to familiarize yourself if you can, just so you know what project funding is available to you. So I want to talk a little bit more about the specific rounds of funding, because we released one set of documents, both guidelines and PSP, and it's not only just for this next round of funding, which is set to begin in December, but it also is for a future round of funding that wouldn't begin until the very end of 2022 or beginning of 2023. So for this first round, there's about $152 million available just to the critically overdrafted basins. And really, what this means is that there is $7.6 million available for each eligible critically overdrafted basin. And this is going to be done through a modified competitive process, and I'll explain what is meant by that. So the appropriation required that the funds are to be awarded on a competitive basis But as I mentioned, the time constraint associated with those San Joaquin Valley projects, they need to be committed, by September of next year. So we needed to create a modified process that would streamline, the solicitation even faster than what we did with last year's implementation grant program. And so to do this, what we're going to have the critically overdrafted basins prepare a funding plan. And that funding plan will be for a total of $10 million, for the entire basin. And there's only going to be one application that's allowed per basin based on the draft documents right now. And that, again, we're only awarding 7.6 million per basin. So that's one aspect of competitiveness, is that the COD basins will be presenting a plan that, for more than what funding is available. But the other competitive aspect comes from the fact that GSAs themselves are made up of multiple public agencies. And so when, these basins will put together their funding plan, they're going to do this by self-evaluating their projects that they put together in the list, using the PSP scoring criteria that's currently, in the document. And then when DWR receives the funding plan, we will verify that the projects are eligible activities, and then we'll also compare it against, to look at how these projects were evaluated, within each basin. And so really, it is meant to still be, this extension of local control and helping, you all be able to identify what projects are best suited for your needs, but it also is enabling us to award these funds as quickly as we possibly can to meet that commitment requirement that was in the appropriation language. One last thing to add, of the 7.6 million available, a minimum of $3.7 million will be for those projects that meet that San Joaquin Valley, project classification. And again, this was a requirement of the legislation. We don't have flexibility on this in terms of how much money must be awarded, for those efforts. But again, if you have a recommendation of another way that we can go about this, again, please provide that through the comment to the grant program. But the remaining funds, for the funding, list can be for, any type of projects that it's at the basin's discretion. And that goes back to the list of eligible activities that I presented before. And then as far as round 2 goes, this round, again, as I mentioned earlier, would start at the end of 2022 or beginning of 2023. And it would be for high and medium priority basins. And this 205 million really consists of the remaining. There's a San Joaquin Valley project funds. There's a couple of non-San Joaquin Valley funds from this current year's general fund appropriation, and then it assumes the 120 million from the future general fund appropriation that would come in the next 2 fiscal years, and then it also includes the 71.5 million in Proposition 68 funds that were remaining after the round 1 solicitation. And this is going to be done on a competitive basis that's more like to the traditional grant program, where you would submit a grant application, and include work plan, budget, schedule, and also project justifications. And in this case, we would have, it would still be one application allowed per basin, but we would have a maximum grant award of $8 million per basin. Again, all this is still proposed, and so please, if you have, or concerns or recommendations for another approach, please provide those comments. Really, the last thing I wanted to leave you with is just some reminders of how to get involved, just with the various components of our assistance efforts. We as a department are constantly looking for ways to improve our assistance. And so if you have suggestions or comments on how to do that, or just if you have general questions at all, you can email them to our sgmps@water.ca.gov email account. We always have somebody monitoring this account, and so you should receive a response, within a day or two. And then the next item here, as Aaron mentioned before, if you'd like to receive information about our sustainable groundwater program, you can subscribe to our SGMP listserv by using, clicking on this link here. And then I touched upon this a little bit ago. If you want to subscribe to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Grant Program listserv, this is how you would access through this link here. But again, all of these links are provided on our website, and so you can access them directly there. And then wanted to touch upon our Sigma portal. I know the last 2 days we talked about the Sigma portal and how to upload GSPs and alternatives to GSPs. But what the portal also has is you can use the find your groundwater sustainability agency in your area search feature that it has, and then you can also see which GSPs have been submitted to DWR to date. And then lastly here, we just wanted to provide a reminder of our assistance and engagement page. That was what Aaron walked you all through. And then just want to emphasize again, if you are looking to find where your DWR region office point of contact, you can find that located on this page as well. So with that, we're going to go ahead and transition to the question portion of the presentation. And so if you have comments or questions for today, use the Teams chat box, or you can email us at the sgmps@water.ca.gov email account. And so I think with that, I believe what we're going to do is, I think we've already started receiving some questions, and I think Tim Godwin, you're going to provide us with a list of questions.
You bet, Keith. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. A couple questions have come in. The first being, maybe you can explain a little bit more about facilitation service availability and what that looks like moving forward in Sigma.
So good question. We have offered facilitation services, for a number of years. Actually, I think we created this program back in 2015 to support the actual GSA formation activities, and our facilitation services kind of evolved, over the years. So we went from the GSA formation support to supporting the GSAs with their GSP development activities. And now that those critically overdrafted basins have already moved or transitioned into the implementation of their GSPs, we have some facilitation services that are supporting those GSAs with their plan implementation, and with the remaining high medium priority basins transitioning into that phase. We intend to extend those level of services if needed, to the high medium priority basins as well. And so really we have a dedicated, group of facilitators through our contract, and we've been able to secure funding for the long term to be able to continue to make this service available into the future. And so, this is definitely one of those areas where we think that we have an understanding of what potential services are needed, and you can see those on our facilitation, the web page that Aaron referenced earlier. But if there are other services that you would like to see us offer, please feel free to provide those comments.
Great, thank you, Keith. We've received a couple of questions in Espanol today. We've been trying to translate those appropriately, but I think it's fair. These are valid questions that we want to make sure that we're asking here. So Keith, one of the questions is that in some communities, there are language barriers that create challenges for engagement. Is there assistance that can help with that?
So right now, as Aaron mentioned, we've got the written translation services, and that's meant to support, be able to get documents, converted into up to 8 different languages, for helping with, outreach, engagement, education activities. We don't currently have a service that can make verbal translation services available for the GSAs, for facilitated meetings or anything like that. But the grant funding that we have available right now, and particularly the solicitation that is going to be opening here very soon, those are the kinds of things you can request funding for. And so if you are, if your basin needs to have that type of verbal translation services provided, please include that, as an activity that you would like to see funding for.
Excellent, thank you. Another follow-up to that is, many times information and resources don't necessarily reach the people or communities that are experiencing these challenges, especially associated with the drought conditions we're experiencing. What are the current available drought resources for the communities? Are there ways to fund community needs assessments? Because that seems to be in great need currently. Any thoughts on that? Sorry.
Yeah, no, we didn't, we were touching on the grant programs that have directly been applicable to sustainable groundwater management activities, but we didn't touch upon some of the other grant programs that are available for other drought needs. And so there were a couple different programs that were created this year through the budget process that actually was approved back in June. For those of you may not be familiar, that this budget approval process was split into kind of 2 phases. The first was approved in June, and then the second phase was in September. And in June, there was some funding that was made available for small community water system funding, and that is really to support those small water systems that were having challenges associated with the drought. Seeing experience, with wells potentially their community wells going dry, or looking to provide access to other community systems that have more reliable supply. We have awarded this is not a traditional grant program where it's the one due date for an application. This is done on a continuous basis, and I think, to my knowledge, so far we've awarded about $68 million worth of projects for that small community system program, and there's a total of about $200 million available. And so if you are interested in that program, you can access information through the Financial Assistance Branch webpage. And so I was walking, or I had some screenshots today of the Sustainable Groundwater Management grant program page, but within that same area of local assistance, or I think we call it Working With Us, you can identify access to the small systems webpage. And then there's also another program that was created this year, and there are draft documents or draft guidelines of PSPs associated with the Urban and Multi-Benefit Project Grant Program, and that's something that is more for the larger systems, but obviously there's still opportunities where those larger systems can even benefit some of the smaller systems if necessary. I wish I knew a little bit more about that I could share right now, but hopefully you all can go, again, to the Financial Assistance Branch website and gather some more information there if you have more questions about it.
Great, thank you, Keith. Follow up here. Will the grant PSP solicitation package be made available in Spanish as well to support understanding for those communities and how they are eligible?
That has not been considered at this point, but that's absolutely something that we can look to do. I think our translation services can be made available to provide that translation.
Great. And sticking with the vein of the grants, are CUD's basins who received funding under round 1 being eliminated from the competing for round 2 funding?
No, they are still eligible.
Great. I think that solves that one. And then just kind of a softball, just so we can all hear it. Just wondering if this webinar is going to be made available via video recording at a later date.
Yes, yeah, we're going to be posting this and the other webinars from this week on our website.
That appears to be the questions that we've received thus far. If anybody else has any others, please feel free to include them into the chat or send them on to sgmps@water.ca.gov. Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, thank you. And I think maybe we can wait another minute or so just to see if there's going to be other questions that come in. But absolutely, really appreciate you all taking the time to participate in today's webinar. As I mentioned, we really are looking for ways to constantly improve all of our assistance efforts. And so, please don't be shy about providing, comments to our email account, but also this is a great opportunity, for, you all to connect with your basin point of contact. They are a fantastic resource. I know Aaron touched upon them already, but I'm going to reiterate here just because we really have made a commitment to each of the high medium priority basins that are required to develop GSPs that we've got individuals that are made available to those basins, not just the GSAs, but the other interested parties within those basins, that they can reach out to those basin point of contacts, or excuse me, the DWR point of contact, and get those questions answered. They also work directly with us here in headquarters, so that if there are certain questions that maybe are challenging or require additional input from our management team, that they flag those for us too. So definitely want you to utilize all the resources that we have available so you can stay in contact and in connection with us, so we can work together to best implement Sigma. So I don't think I've seen any other questions come in. Tim, is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Well, since we're sort of not getting any more questions, I think I have no problem ending the webinar early. I'm sure all of you would probably appreciate that as well. So again, thank you so much for participating today. We look forward to meeting with you all again soon. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody.